Hello, Intro to Art students. As you know, the three main focuses of this course in the drawing portion so far have been drawing from life, drawing from source material, which in other words would be photographs or other sources, and then drawing from imagination. Even though we do other things in this course besides drawing, the focus of this last unit has been in drawing and aiming for realism. So what we've been doing as of late is doing a lot of drawings from photographs, and we're going to continue to do that. The last one we did was of a skull. And now for this one, you have a lot of choices, okay? This whole unit is about student choice. So the first choice you have is what size or format you want the paper to be, okay? So we can work on black paper. We can also work on white paper, okay? So I'm going to let you make a decision about what size you think would be best for your composition, what size you think you could handle based on how much time you typically have to devote on a piece and the pace at which you usually work. So these are a couple student examples from last year of working on black paper, okay, which is the last thing that we did. So if you feel like you're on a roll, if you feel like this is something that you found a lot of success with, you might want to push it past just a basic level, and now we're going to have a little more depth. So this was an example of a student last year that ended up doing a T-set, found a couple images to work from. I believe the student actually used 2 separate photographs, so that's something too. Don't feel like you have to be limited to one, but found a picture of a cup and saucer and also found a T-set and kind of put them together. This was a piece from a student last year as well. What I like about this one is I know in the past you've probably heard from teachers like myself or other art teachers, you know, make sure you fill up the whole page. Well, in this particular case, they left part of the page blank, and I think it actually works compositionally because the edge of this table is leading the viewer's eye into this negative space, and same with the spoon that's kind of pointing outside of the ceramic container as well. Okay. But what I really think was a good choice with this one is they chose a subject that had a lot of very bright highlights, very deep dark shadows, and that contrast, that chiaroscuro, that really dramatic shadow and highlight is what makes this an interesting piece, and it works well with white and black colored pencil on black paper. Okay, and here's the last example I wanted to show you for black. So this was by a student last year as well, and chose, I think, something that is just a great subject and something that I know a lot of people your age are interested in would be shoes. And what I like about this is the photograph itself, to be honest, isn't that fantastic of a photograph, okay? Maybe it's just the printer that it was printed out on. There's not a whole lot of variety of texture or shading, and I must admit when I first saw the photograph I was a little skeptical of, is this going to work well? But they took some liberties and really pushed the texture of the leather to make it more interesting. So the way it was shaded, the way it was layered, the direction of the shading mattered a lot in this one. And you can tell just the attention to detail, even those little holes in the top of the leather of the shoe. And then if you go down to the sole, just the texture of that bottom too is extremely convincing. So something you probably noticed from looking at these is they weren't just left the black of the paper. In some spots, they went back with a black colored pencil and really emphasized those darker areas. So you're not limited to black paper. If you didn't find a lot of success with the last one that we did, you could end up doing something on white paper instead, okay? The main goal or objective of this piece is the same. We're trying to create accurate proportions of a real object, okay? And so that's really the first choice you had, was to choose an object that you want to be your subject. You can take your own photographs of that object. So in this case, I'm actually working from a photograph of my class ring, okay? Or for this one, I'm okay with you finding source material online. So this shoe that I saw, even though the young lady owned this shoe, she was looking for a good crisp picture of it online and found one, and that's perfectly suitable for this piece as well. So we have to make a choice. Is it going to be a grayscale graphite drawing on white paper, or is it going to be a white and black colored pencil drawing on black paper? So that's where we need to make the call first. So like we discussed before, you have a lot of choices in this piece. The other choice you have to make is what size of paper you want. Now, my guess is a lot of you, especially if you're hesitant about your drawing ability, will probably want to start with a smaller piece of paper. But if you're a little more advanced and you're up for a challenge and you want a larger piece, that's fine as well. I think the most intimidating part about this for any drawer, even if you have a lot of experience, is how to set up this drawing initially. And it's going to be a little bit different whether you choose to do it on white paper or whether you choose to do it on black paper. If you're doing it on black paper, okay, you're going to keep it really light regardless. But if you're going to do it on black paper, you're probably going to want to start off with a white colored pencil, but you're going to use it extremely light. Now, if your photograph that you printed out or that you have on your phone or laptop, you don't necessarily have to print this out. If it's rectangular, you kind of want to ask yourself which way it should go. So this one is landscape view. It's wider than it is tall. so my paper would go that way. Now, instead, if I had a photograph that was square, okay, or if I wanted it to be square, I could crop that or just fold it back. And then in that case, I would want to cut my paper. If you're in class, you could do that on the cutting board, or if you're at home, you could fold it back and cut it, or use a ruler and then make a sharp cut. Okay, but I'm going to stick with the rectangular format for this one. Now, you have other choices here too. I could just freehand this from looking at it, okay? Or I could do kind of a grid, but this isn't a real formal grid. This is an informal grid. I could fold this into quadrants. And by dividing it up into 4 sections, it gives me bite-sized pieces that give me a little bit of an idea of where things land. For instance, the saucer is right dead center in the middle of the composition. The shadow of the spoon is right on this top half line. Okay, so those things already are helping me figure out where everything should land. Okay, so what I would then do is, and you could use a ruler, but I think you could probably eyeball it. Just say, okay, that's about the halfway point, make a little line. That's about the halfway point, make a little line, and then I just kind of throw a plus sign in the middle to kind of show roughly where those quadrants are. Again, I'm keeping everything so light so that I could go back and erase it later. Okay, but at least that would give me a starting point, and I could say, okay, very lightly, this is where that saucer is going to be, coming up from there. And you'll notice I don't trust myself to do one pencil stroke. I go back around and around until I'm satisfied with the shape, the form that I'm making. Okay, and I'm just continuously looking at my photograph, my reference material. Okay, another thing I look at is, how far from the top, and I'm judging the top as being where the black stops. How far from the top does that cup go, And this paper is a little bigger, so I have to take that into account as well. And you're not going to make a perfect assessment, but trying to figure that out. Okay, keeping it ever so light. And I also ask myself, how far does it go to that edge? Well, it's a lot closer to that edge, so I have to, maybe I need to make my mug bigger then. See, that gives me it's not a big deal. I can just go back and make the handle a little bit bigger. Okay, so you can see how I'm very lightly starting to map that out. A similar process is going to take place if you're doing this on black paper. Okay, the only key difference in my mind is I've given you a lot of different drawing pencils and tools to use. You want to use the one that's the lightest to start, which 4H and 4B are the ones that we typically use. So 4H is lighter. Okay, so we would start with that. And again, same thing. I have a lot more space at the bottom of this composition. So I want to figure out, okay, the ring is going to go probably to about right there at the bottom. So kind of make a little mark for myself. I know it's hard to see in this video, but I'm trying to keep it light, remember? And then this goes the whole way, the front of the ring, where the gemstone is. Probably hits about right here. So even if I don't fold this into quadrants, I can still do the same process. It starts more with math than it does anything else. This is really a good example of how you can use estimation and fractions, about half, a quarter, trying to figure out where these marks should be before I even begin, okay? Because if I just start drawing the gemstone and ignore everything else, I guarantee you the ring is either going to be too large or too small, or maybe it'll just be completely out of proportion. Maybe I made the gemstone accurate, but then I made the rest of the circular part of the ring smaller than it should be, okay? And that's something that's really disappointing to discover later. So when you're making a drawing that you're trying to scale, make a little larger, or make it exact size, proportion, one relationship of one part of the object to another are your most important thing, okay? So we're going to jump ahead, and I know we're jumping ahead a lot, okay? But obviously the main simple kind of contours were mapped out before anything was shaded. The main thing I want to show you on both this example and my other example that I'm working on is that there really aren't any hard outlines, okay? And that's something that, with the skull, I was trying to really emphasize with you guys as you were working is this is not a cartoon, okay? As much as I love cartoons and, since this is Intro to Art, we'll be approaching all different styles. But for this particular unit, we're trying very, very hard to aim at realism or naturalism that's making something look as convincing as possible. Now, you can see I've got a long way to go, okay? I've got to revise, the angle of this part. I definitely need to make some of these parts of these gemstones darker. To make that look a little more accurate, okay, and I'll be sweeping in there with my 4B pencil to go a little darker in those areas. But you can start very lightly and, start in the areas that are going to be dark, and just, I always say shade in the direction. I mean, there's definitely more than one way to do this, but shade in the direction of the contour of the object. So if the object is curved, my shading is going to be curved, okay? If my object is very geometric, like the cuts in this gemstone, then I'm going to be a little more geometric, a little more straight with my shading, okay? If I were drawing a furry teddy bear, okay, I might be a little more loose with my shading and, go all over the place and layer that to create texture. Okay, so it really depends on what your object is. And you can see that too in the way that I shaded this mug, okay? And for this particular one, I used a lot of cross hatching, so strokes going in different directions overlapping each other, okay? And again, you can see in the student example how they paid very close attention to the direction that they were shading as well, okay? So if we were proceeding with this one, we would need the rest of the composition, so we would map all that out, of course, okay? But there are certain things that I still need to work on, even though this looks pretty accurate so far. So once you get to a point where you've got some good ideas of where your light and dark are, you can really go in with the brights with the white and emphasize those things so they really pop. So at this point, you know where everything is supposed to be, and you can have a little more freedom to push harder with those tools to make those parts stand out that you want to pop from far away. And that's what I feel a lot of you really learned from that skull piece that we did, was that this isn't a coloring book. You're not just filling it in. It's a matter of layers. And that's super important, and that's what's going to make this convincing, okay? And every once in a while, you got to step back and ask yourself, like, hey, you know, do I need more brightness there? Do I need more darkness there? So you can do really the same thing, especially in the dark areas, is go in with that black pencil and make them really, really dark, not just relying on the dark of the paper to make that pop. Now, one of the things I think I warned you about with the skull is I would avoid mixing the white and the black together to get gray, okay? And the reason why is you're going to get a different shade of gray than if you just lightly apply the white to the paper and the white of the colored pencil mixes with the black of the background to give it a shade of gray. That's going to be a little more accurate to do it that way. If you mix the black and the white together, you'll get gray, but it's going to look like a spot that stands out. So I would avoid that if you can. All right, and with this one, you don't need any white or black pencil. We're just using the 2 graphite pencils I gave you. Okay, all right, so you've got a lot of choices to make. The first is, what's your object, what's your subject? The second is, am I doing this on white or black paper? And then the third would be, what size do I want the paper to be? What format do I want it to be? And if you're working with me or from home, deciding, you know, what's the most realistic way to approach this? Am I going to have a printout? Am I going to work from a computer or a iPhone screen? However you decide to do it is fine, as long as you're using the source material the entire time. That means you're looking at it the entire time you're drawing. We're never putting it away, okay? Because the minute you start putting this away is when these objects will become inaccurate, all right? So good luck to you, and we'll see you soon. Happy drawing.